Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I want to say that I am pleased that Representative Wilson has joined us. Good to see you. Representative Kenton, thank you. Anybody else? Representative Atkins. Also a few of our cabinet secretaries in addition to Secretary Vasali and Secretary Cook. We have Secretary Murphy and Secretary Batt. Am I missing anybody else? Don't want to miss out on any of my cabinet secretaries. Well, thank you all for coming today for our presentation of the budget. Most of the presentation will be done by Director Vasali and by Secretary Cook. I will start off. We could go the first slide. We're going to talk a little bit about our budgeting principles. Director Vasali will do an overview of the operating budget, and then Secretary Cook we'll talk about revenue stability, which is what our plan is for the sunsets. For those of you who have been here for a while, none of this will be a big surprise. The need to continue to invest in our priorities around education and putting people back to work, as well as governing responsibly, which means finding savings wherever we can possibly find them. Keeping our core commitments in K-12 and higher ed, as well as in public safety and healthcare, and ensuring fiscal responsibility. Part of that is, in fact, about the governing responsibly and always looking for savings where we can. But we are very proud of the AAA rating that we have, and Secretary Cook will be talking about this a little bit more later. But the ratings agencies very much respect the way we go about our financial management, and that includes having a rainy day fund that is fully funded. It includes only appropriating 98% of anticipated revenues in case there's any downfall. There's a bit of a cushion, and then also adhering to our strict three-part debt limit. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Director Vasali. I may pop up and down every few minutes to interject something. And sorry, we have to do it this way with the microphone and because of the streaming. So I'm going to turn it over to Director Vasali, and we'll likely be back up shortly.
Thank you, Governor. I apologize for my voice. Those of you that heard me last night know that this is 100% improvement from my voice last night, so I'm happy about that. These next couple of slides are really for the benefit of those of you that haven't been following the budget for the last 4 years. We have made a number of efficiencies, cost-saving measures, and reductions and consolidations throughout state government in an effort to balance the budget and operate more efficiently. To name a few on this slide, we've taken over 1,000 positions out of state government, and we are operating in the executive branch with over 500 fewer people. And this is at a time when the demand on state services has grown. We enacted health and pension reform for the state employees' health and pension plan, and that is saving us over $131 million during the next 5 years, and is expected to save almost $500 million over 15 years. Through our reverse energy auction, where we buy the state's energy, we've saved over $3 million a year, and we've met the Governor's Executive Order 18 goal of 35% renewables in our portfolio. We've reduced the size of the state's fleet, and we continue to do so every day. We have moved our servers to the virtual cloud, which saves on manpower as well as space, and it's a more secure environment. We've implemented cost-saving measures in the way we staff our IT initiatives and consolidated that contracting across all state agencies. We've renegotiated our pharmacy contract for prescription drugs, saving us millions of dollars a year. I won't walk you through every item on the next two slides, but as you can see, we've made consolidations, for example, in the Department of Natural Resources, where they were set up to deal with the challenges of the past. Now, without more people, they can deal more efficiently and more quickly with the problems of today. The Division of State Services Centers. Information Technology, the Department of Education, and the Department of Health and Services have all consolidated and cross-trained in their efforts to be able to deal with increasing demands on state government without adding people and costs. In the last slide, we continue to talk about some of our efficiencies and consolidations, including implementing a managed long-term care program for the state's older and most vulnerable citizens, which makes us a leader across the country among states. Moving to the mechanics of how we developed the budget. As you can see from the box at the top of this is slide 7, we start with the official DEFAC estimates in December, and those DEFAC estimates at 98%, which we're only permitted to appropriate 98% of our available resources, provided us with $3.753 billion available. If you compare that number to our current year FY13 appropriations of 3.6, we were positive. We also, which was good news, prior to the December DEFAC meeting, we would not have been able to cover the current year FY13 appropriations with the available revenues. So that was positive, a little bit of good news. We continue to look throughout in the current year for savings opportunities, reductions, and efficiencies. And by doing that, in the area, for example, the Department of Corrections was able to negotiate better terms on their medical contract, which provided savings for us that made available resources for FY14. We were able to identify $29 million available for us in the subsequent year. So we had $98 million as a result. I'm still in the box at the top, available for appropriation towards our FY14 budget. That's the good news. Bad news is, as I'm going to walk you through, our costs that we're looking at in state government amounted to almost $155 million. So those items that are recommended in this year's budget include some very necessary things, the cost of doing business in government. Specifically, employee and retiree health, $15.4 million. Projected employer pension contribution, $8.1 million. These are things that we are obligated to fund, and we have every year. Many states don't fund their pension contribution. We fund the annual required contribution. And those two numbers combined would be significantly higher if it were not for the House Bill 81, which is the health and pension reform bill that I discussed earlier. Steps for public education. These are teachers' pay steps for years of experience or degree requirements. Paraprofessional pay plan. This is a 4-year program. This is the second year of funding for that, which consolidates the steps for the paras in the classroom and advances some of their pay levels for competencies. Annualization of positions and other steps included in our personnel cost funding. Medicaid, $35.8 million towards the state's Medicaid program. As a result of the Affordable Care Act, Delaware was able to take advantage of a federal program to provide Medicaid for more people and also receive an increased reimbursement rate from the feds. So we are realizing half a year of that savings in FY14. So that number would have actually been $38 million higher if it were not for our participation in that program. We'll realize the full year of that savings in FY15. Debt service, $19.8 million. Moving on to slide 8. In the area of health and social services, the tobacco settlement proceeds have funded a number of health-related programs throughout state government. Those proceeds have been diminished. So some of the programs that were previously general funded that were moved onto the tobacco fund are now being picked back up by the general fund. That amounts to $7.4 million. Providing additional services and more placements for Delaware citizens with developmental disabilities that are aging out of the public school system, $6.8 million. Community-based services for individuals with serious and persistent mental illness, $4.3 million. And the increased demand for home-delivered meals, community food programs, and picking up a federal drop-off for the Birth to 3 program. So all these programs dealing with Delaware's most vulnerable populations. In the area of education, $13.4 million in total funding recommended. additional funding recommended to their base budget. To fund student unit growth, student population based on the September 30th unit count, 110 units, $8.7 million. Pupil transportation formula increases of $2.2 million. Full-day kindergarten, Indian River School District will make Delaware the one of 10 states in the country that offers full-day kindergarten to every parent who wants it statewide. And that's $1.9 million. And the Early Childhood Assistance Program, to bring up the rates in that program, $421,000. In the Department of Services for Children, Youth, and Their Families, the completion of the Family and Child Tracking System, $3.7 million, which will allow integrated case management in a more modernized technology setting to allow the caseworkers to do better work for the kids department. Volume increases for child welfare services. We're seeing an increase in teenagers and the placement needs that those teenagers have in that department, $3.4 million. The next few items that, if you can see on the slide, are highlighted. We're going to cover in more detail on the next slide. And these are, so I'm just going to touch on them, then we'll go into a little bit more detail on the next slide. And the governor did mention some of these in the State of the State address, and we've been working with Lieutenant Governor on the implementation and development of these ideas. Expanding in-school behavioral health services, $3.3 million. Statewide targeted prevention programs for youth, $2.2. And youth aging out of foster care, $515,000. We also have recommendations for statewide technology initiatives, safety and homeland security, which includes $530,000 for 6 new state troopers to deal with statewide violent crime, and the accelerated development of the school safety plans at $300,000, which is going to take our plan to have a school safety plan in every school from 5 years down to 2 years. So in total, $154 million of adds to the budget amount to a 3.49% budget growth. However, those items that were highlighted on the previous slide amount to less than 0.2% of the budget growth. And those are the new initiatives. I'm going to turn it over to the governor to walk you through some of those. Thank you,
Can you get, go back to the previous slide for one moment, please? So I want to make it clear, everything that is not highlighted on this slide is not a new initiative. They're things that we've been doing and we have to do more of. And just to give you a sense of it, for example, the developmental disability services, the new placements, is $6.8 million for that. I mean, these are people with significant disabilities who graduate from high school, and then we assume responsibility for them. And if we didn't, they would be in incredible difficulty. And this is a big number every year. It's an expensive add each year, but it's something that we believe that we need to continue to do. There's a similar story about the food, and there's a similar story, about, quite a number of these initiatives. So I just want to make that very clear, that the things that are shaded are essentially and the things that will be on the next page are really the only new things in the budget. So why don't we go to the next page? So, as Ann said a moment ago, so this is the complete list, essentially, of new things in the budget. Together, they account for less than 0.2% of the budget growth. And let me start with the first one. I mentioned in the State of the State speech last week about my commitment to doing more in the area of mental health services, particularly for kids. And the Lieutenant Governor and I, along with Secretary Murphy, visit a lot of schools. And one of the things that we hear most often from teachers and other school-based personnel and administrators in the schools is that they're seeing more and more students with mental health issues, and they're seeing these kids younger and younger. And we have an incredible gap at middle school. We have the wellness centers at the high school level, and in fact, I'm told that the #1 service that's requested at the high school wellness centers is, in fact, for mental health services. We have, I think, 54 family crisis therapists at the elementary school level. But in the entire state of Delaware, we have 3 behavioral health consultants serving middle schools. And that does not get the job done. And so I was absolutely determined to doing something significant to address this need. And I turned to the Lieutenant Governor who has been an incredible advocate for kids for a very long time, and I asked him to please come up with a plan. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to him in just a second to explain that plan. Since it's a little awkward with my sitting down and him getting up, I just want to run through the others because he's actually going to talk about the second one as well. Some of you may remember in my State of the State speech, I also mentioned the issue of crime in the city of Wilmington in my visit to 10th and Pine Streets, where a 10-year-old boy, and I visited there just a couple days after a 16-year-old was shot there and killed. And I had a conversation with the 10-year-old kid who was telling me that, the kids in the neighborhood have nothing to do. And unfortunately, he's right. And there are kids throughout the state, not just in Wilmington, but there are a lot of kids throughout the state who who don't have much to do. And in a more perfect world, it wouldn't be up to state government to fix that because parents and families and neighborhoods and communities would be able to take care of it. But we don't live in that perfect world. And so there is very significant research. It's pretty much rock solid that giving kids something to do, particularly from 3 o'clock in the afternoon until 6 in the evening, when if they're unsupervised, they're much more likely to engage in risky behaviors, can make a profound difference in the lives of these kids. Again, this is not specific to one part of the state. And so I again called upon the Lieutenant Governor to put together a plan, and he will describe sort of both the process and the plan as it turned out. In terms of, Ann mentioned the foster care piece. I talked about the National Guard initiative in the State of the State, appreciative to General Vavala for that. She also mentioned the acceleration of the school safety plans. I think, I appreciate the leadership of Secretary Shalero, who has really been pushing on this for a while. And last year, we actually, kicked off this initiative to make sure that every school in the state has a high-quality school safety plan, and this money here is going to allow us to accelerate that effort. And then finally, the additional 6 state troopers. And this is really focused specifically on the violent crime issue. So that pretty much in totality represents the new adds in the budget. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Lieutenant Governor Den to talk about both the process that he went through in pulling together the plans on mental health and on after-school programming for kids, and then sort of what it's going to look like.
Thanks, Governor. What the governor asked us to do in the fall when he, to his great credit, recognized that we had this issue with child mental health and our ability to provide what we needed to these kids was to ask me to talk to the folks who know most about it and figure out what ideally we would do for them. So we sat down in November with the Medical Society, with folks from Delaware Guidance, folks from our own behavioral health services, got the folks who know most about this issue together in a room and asked them, what's the best we can do for these kids? And the plan that is proposed in the governor's budget is driven by that. As he mentioned, the very first thing they pointed us to was the middle schools, that we had this glaring gap where we provide services at the high school level, services at the elementary school level, but not very much at all at the middle school level. So 2/3 of this $3.3 million is going to be dedicated to the plan that the governor mentioned to increase literally tenfold the number of frontline behavioral health personnel that we have at the middle school level. It'll take us from 3 schools to 30, and as it's currently envisioned, at least 1 middle school in each of the school districts will have one of these behavioral health consultants. So ideally, the consultant, if time permits, would be able to work not just in the middle school where that consultant is stationed, but also intermittently be able to help other middle schools in a school district as well. They told us this was important for 2 reasons. Number one, the obvious reason that if you have a person with mental health training in the school, that is invaluable on a day-to-day basis to the teachers and administrators who are trying to deal with the issues that some of these kids present with. Some of these are really subtle issues, behavioral issues that can nevertheless be a huge challenge for a teacher trying to have a good learning environment in a classroom. Some of them can be much more serious and result in threats to other children, harm to other children, so it really covers the gamut. So having someone in the school helps day to day. It also helps, bless you, in terms of creating a good network of private providers. We have real shortages in our state up and down the line in terms of private providers of mental health services for kids. And one reason for that is that it's very difficult to get kids to maintain a treatment regimen with a private provider, to show up for appointments, to stick with a treatment plan, to take prescribed medications. Having someone in the school is a huge asset in terms of getting a middle school age kid to stick with a treatment plan, and that in turn helps build a private practice infrastructure around the state. So it's very important for two reasons, and it's going to have both of those effects, we believe. The other third of the money goes to two other things that this group of folks identified as priorities for us. One is reimbursing through our Medicaid and our CHIP programs for pediatricians and family doctors to be able to do consults with child psychiatrists. Currently, under the way that our Medicaid and CHIP programs are set up, if a pediatrician has a patient who they believe would benefit from some psychiatric intervention, all that they can do is refer to a psychiatrist, and that child has to wait at least weeks, usually months, to actually get in to see a psychiatrist. It's more expensive, more time-consuming, bad for the kid. What this will allow us to do is to reimburse both the pediatrician and the psychiatrist to do a consult where the pediatrician will work up a study for the psychiatrist and then do a telephone consult with the psychiatrist, be able to get guidance for dealing with that child, if necessary, get advice about properly prescribing medication, and be able to treat that child more quickly and ultimately probably more cost effectively than constantly doing referrals out. Medicaid and CHIP don't currently reimburse psychiatrists or pediatricians to do that. Under the governor's proposal, it will. And finally, we have some kids who are under the care of our behavioral health folks at the state who would benefit from direct communication with a psychiatrist but can't, again, because we don't have enough in our state. And this would provide for them to be able to be seen either via Skype or telepsychiatry or some long-distance means of having a Delaware licensed professional who's not currently located in the state be able to provide direct services to them. So 2/3 of the money for folks in the schools, the other third for these two other services that, again, were identified for us by these folks as being critical. And it's, if funded completely, a huge step forward for us. On the second item that the governor mentioned, and again, the research is uniform as to the value of this across the board. What we are doing with that $2.2 million is setting up a competitive grant program. We recognize that there are a variety of very good ideas around the state for how to do after-school and summer programs for kids, and we wanted to encourage folks to come up with innovative and effective programs. And so what we've set up is a set of criteria that are going to be used in awarding these competitive grants. Some of the criteria are having a curriculum for the program, and that could be either a traditional academic curriculum, it could be arts, cultural-based, it could be agriculture-based, but we want the programs that apply for this money to have some sort of set curriculum. We're going to be concerned with student safety, whether the program is located in a school, whether transportation provides for that. That's one of the factors. Another factor is going to be that we want folks who are administering these programs that get these grants to be trained in the state's Lifelines program, which is a depression detection and suicide prevention program. That's been an issue in our state. We want to make sure that folks who are getting funds to operate these after-school and summer programs to be trained in being able to detect kids who might be at risk and how to deal with that. And another factor is going to be need. Is this a program located in a part of the state where there aren't currently programs available for kids and accessible to kids who need them? So there are going to be a formal list of criteria, but the idea here is to be as intelligent as we can in distributing what inevitably is not going to be an amount of money that meets the demand for it, and also to get some good models so that in the future, as we have more resources available, we'll have some good models of things that work that people can replicate. And we're very hopeful that the legislature will fund this, and we think we can do some good things for kids with it. Thanks, Governor.
Thank you, Matt. So, continuing on with building the budget, we go now to slide 10. Just to recap, we went through a list of including the initiatives that the governor and Matt just spoke about and our other costs of $154.8 million. Our funds available from the box on slide 7 amounted to $98.8 million. So that leaves us with a shortfall of $56 million. Moving to slide 11, so you can see our deficit of $56 million we approached and solved in a balanced way by basically dividing it, among other additional cuts to programs in the budget, for example, reduced funding for ag lands preservation, open space, and a set aside for our energy efficiency fund, which left us with a remaining shortfall of $27.3 million. So I'll be turning it over to Tom Cook in just a second, Secretary Cook, to talk to you about how we're addressing that remaining shortfall. But before I do that, I just want to walk you through not just what we've talked about for 14, but really a look ahead to FY15. It's very important because the current revenue situation that we're dealing with really crosses over from 14 into 15, so it's important to look at the 2 years in combination. So on slide 12, if you take the official DEFAC estimate from December for FY15 and the 98% that would be available for us to appropriate, you find a number of $3,650 million. If you take our current appropriations that we're recommending today, and that would be the budget, grants and aid, and cash to the bond bill of $3,805 against next year's revenue, so that would assume no growth, we would have a problem of $155 million. So just to cover what we're recommending for 14 with 15's revenues, we would be short $155 million. If you were to, by way of example, grow the budget by 3%, which is not unrealistic, it's certainly within the range of possibilities since this year's budget is growing at just over 3%. That would be $111.4 million. So if the budget were to grow by that 3% in FY15, we'd be facing a shortfall of $266.4 million based on the official DEFAC estimate in December, which does include an underlying growth in GDP. So this is basically what we're facing in FY15. And I think it's important that we remind everyone that we do have to look not just at the next year, but at the following year. So with that, we are going to turn and take a look at our revenue and what our proposal is in our financial plan dealing with revenues. Tom?
Thank you, Ann. And everyone's on slide 13. And this is really a recap of where DEFAC is right now. You look at FY13, and as you see, the line starts to go down. We have a $99 million gap between going from 13 to 15. Once again, keep in mind that this line shows that the sunsets take effect and that we lose that revenue in the upcoming years. Moving on to the next slide. Just as we have with budget policy, we also have tax policy principles that we adhere to. And we've been able to have a AAA bond rating as a result of adhering to these key principles. DEFAC is a nonpartisan, objective organization that projects the revenues 6 times a year and makes sure that we are accurately depicting what is going on in the economy. Not only are there private sector members, but there's also private sector members on the council that tell us exactly what is going on in the economy and what they're seeing, and we value their input. Delaware is known for its rapid amortization of its debt. 70% of our debt is amortized over the first 10 years of the life of the obligation. We often look for outstanding bonds that have a higher interest rate than what we can get in the market right now to try to defease those. And since the governor took office, we've been able to realize a $32.5 million present value savings as a result of that, looking for those efficiencies. Delaware has always been known to match one-time revenues with one-time expenditures to make sure that we are not building in unnecessary things into the budget so that we can maintain that AAA bond rating. And as you can see from the slide, we've been recognized by 2 various organizations for those principles that we adhere to. So getting into the real numbers here, as you may recall, in 2009, there were 4 taxes that were scheduled to sunset. The personal income tax, gross receipts tax, the corporate franchise tax, the ability to incorporate in the state of Delaware, and the estate tax. So the first set of columns shows that if in fact there were a repeal of the sunsets, this is the additional revenue that the state of Delaware would gain in these respective categories, personal income tax, gross receipts, corporate, and estate tax. So in FY14, if we had a full repeal, we'd have $36.6 million worth of additional revenue, and in FY15, we would have $180.6 million. But the governor's proposal is very targeted, strategically targeted for economic development. And as you can see from the numbers on the right, the FY14 total number is $27.9 million, and in FY15, $156.7. Once again, we're focusing on the personal income tax and gross receipts tax areas to generate economic development. So let's kind of look at each of those categories. In the personal income tax, if you recall, back in 2009, we took just the top rate, marginal rate, from 5.95% to 6.95%. In 2011, many of you recall, there was additional revenue that came on through the DEFAC process, and some of that was ongoing revenue, and some of it was one-time. But we took and focused part of that revenue on lowering the income tax, the top marginal rate, from 6.95 to 6.75. So now, as the governor's proposal for FY14 takes that current rate of 6.75 and reduces it down to 6.6%. Once again, as in 2009, the top rate, only 20% of Delawareans are in that above $60,000 bracket. This allows us to stay competitive with the surrounding states, as you see, New Jersey, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. This law would take effect January 1, 2014. Moving on to the gross receipts tax. Once again, recalling back to 2009, we took an 8% across-the-board increase on the gross receipts tax. When the additional money came in, was available in 2011, effective 2012, we cut that rate by 3% across the board for all the various business categories. But one thing that the governor did, and I think had foresight, was to focus on small businesses and make sure that they are the economic engine of the state. And he took the monthly exclusion, at that point, it was the first $80,000 worth of receipts were excluded monthly, and he took that up to $100,000 per month. So the first $100,000 of receipts are excluded from gross receipts tax. What that did was, that took 330 businesses off the rolls for the state on the gross receipts tax. So the governor's proposal does a couple things. One, it takes an additional 1% across the board cut on the gross receipts tax. It focuses on manufacturing, and manufacturing is a key element in Delaware's economy, and we cut that rate by 30% additionally. We continue the $100,000 monthly exclusion to make sure that those small businesses are working towards driving the economy to a better position. All of this is with an effective date of January 1, 2014. So, moving on to the next slide, just show you some examples of what the gross receipts tax proposal would do. For a business that had $1.2 million worth of annual sales, the original proposal from 2009, if it were to sunset the way it was originally written, that business would have a tax liability of $922. But because we are including the monthly exclusion and bumping it up from $80,000 to $100,000 and keeping that in place, the governor's proposal in this example, that business would have a zero tax liability. Taking another example of a business that had $2.5 million worth of annual sales, the tax liability under the governor's proposal would be 12.45% lower than what the original 2009 sunset law. Moving on to the corporate franchise and estate tax. The corporate franchise tax was put in place in 2009, and the Department of State worked very closely with the business community to make sure that they understood and could absorb this cost of doing business. And so the governor's proposal will lift the sunset on the corporate franchise tax and keep the top tax rate at $180,000 annually. With regards to the estate tax, there was one revision since 2009. When it originally was passed, there was a $3.5 million exemption. The first $3.5 million was exempted from taxes. As we couple with the federal law, that was increased to $5.12 million. And the governor's proposal will lift that sunset, keep the $5.12 million exemption in place, and additionally, as we did in 2009, exempt any farms that are in the Ag Land Farms Preservation Program. So I think what you have here is a revenue stability package that allows us to stay focused and strategically allow for economic development in the state. And I'd like to turn it back to Aunt Sally.
Thank you, Tom. Hello again. Picking up where I left off, we were facing $56 million gap. I outlined additional agency and program cuts of $28.7 million, which left us with a $27 million shortfall. And under the proposal that Secretary Cook just outlined, the FY14 revenues associated with that proposal will close that gap of $27.3 million and balance the financial plan. Slide 21 is an illustration similar to the one we showed you earlier with the DEFAC estimates incorporating the current sunsets and the revenue decrease. This slide shows you the bolder line, on my slide it's the black line, is now flattened out. That's our revenue projections. The line with the positive slope is showing you our current recommendation for FY14 appropriations and 3% growth on the budget for FY15. And so as you can see on this diagram, we will still be facing a projected shortfall for FY15 of approximately $113 million. And so we do have to think about this in a multi-year approach, but it is significantly better than the shortfall we would have faced otherwise of approximately $266 million. And in addition, there are still significant budget pressures remaining. Our recommended budget and bond bill contain no general salary increase for state employees. It contains no increase for our nonprofit providers. There's a reduction to the funding going to the Transportation Trust Fund, reduction to open space, reductions to farmland preservation, and there are also reductions in the Municipal Street Aid Program as well as the Community Transportation Fund. That said, our wrap-up slide gives you the bottom line appropriation amounts for the operating budget, 3712, Transportation Trust Fund of $339.5 million, the grants and aid of $43 million, and a total bond bill of $423.5 million. And that concludes our presentation for today. Thank you very much. Kathy, am I supposed to do something now? Yep, thank you. Thank you.